coming up. Now, part one of our sit-down with Lorinda Swain. We sat down with her a week ago and talked at length about a battle that she maintained, a battle for innocence, and she maintained that from the beginning. She admits she was having a rough time in her life when those molestation allegations came her way. She spent 8 years in jail, 7 years then waiting for an outcome that eventuated at the Michigan Supreme Court, which decided she was due another trial. Of course, her young adopted son is an adult now. He recanted his allegations long ago, but the justice system was well on its way, and so she had to find a way out of this and didn't know if it would ever happen. And we talked to her about that, part one of our discussion now. So today we're talking with a lady who's become quite well known across this part of the state and certainly around the state. Lorinda Swain has agreed to join us and talk to us about her long case, 15 years from one end to the other. And we appreciate the time you've given us today, Lorinda. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, congratulations, I guess, is the first thing to say. I mean, I think a lot of folks can imagine what it might be like to be accused of something they didn't do, but to spend as much time fighting that as you have, it's just tremendous. How does it feel to be on the other end of that?
It feels so good. In all honesty, as real as I always knew that it was, it still seemed unreal to me, unbelievable. And actually, them calling and telling me it's over and that I, had won and that they're not going to retry me, I mean, it feels good, obviously, but it almost seemed unreal. But what makes it real is the fear is gone. So,
right.
Yeah.
You spent 8 years in jail, but upon your release, this was still hanging over your head.
Mm-hmm. For 7 years.
So this situation, and I should say to folks before we go any further that, the details of this have been out there for so long and talked about for so long that I don't think we need to go start to finish and talk about all those details. But we could talk about a couple of them. You had two boys at the time who were young, and this accusation came from one of them. And it really gained traction fast, didn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
Did you feel at that time that it was out of control and that you weren't being listened to, or you must have said, "This is not me."
Yeah, I very definitely said I did not do this. When I was interviewed and arrested and interviewed the next morning, I thought that why they were violating me was because I had contacted my ex-husband and his wife, who taught law at Kellogg Community College. And I wanted to visit my children. I was out on, I actually went to prison because I really did use my parents' charge card. And I did spend 120 days in prison. And prior to that, I had used some drugs, and I accept responsibility for ending up in these shoes because of the fact that I used drugs.
Mm-hmm.
I in no way did the crime, but had I not used drugs, my son probably would have never been over at my ex-husband's house, and the
snowball started.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So he did this in retaliation for that, is your understanding?
No. He molested a little 3.5-year-old girl in my ex-husband's basement.
Mm-hmm.
After the trial, I found out that he was shown pornography, movies, and books in that very same basement by his stepbrother. Ronnie was 14 at the time, I believe. He did have ADHD. He had a low IQ. I think he wasn't a bad little boy as far as he had ADHD and he was very hyper, and I didn't discipline them. They were foster boys that I had adopted, and my husband and I got in a divorce, and
Yeah, and he granted an interview several years ago to a television reporter, and he admitted that he thought that creating this fabrication would help distract from what he'd done.
Exactly. Actually, his law teaching stepmother is the one that confronted him in regards to whether he did or not do that to the little girl. And at first he denied it, said he was playing a game called Babies. And then he finally admitted it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And while this took place, I was doing 120 days in prison. So when I got out on tether, I called for visitation, and they wouldn't answer my calls. And I left a message saying that if they didn't get a hold of me by Friday, I would get a hold of front of the court, and they would be in contempt of court.
Mm-hmm.
So when they violated me, I believed that they were saying that I had threatened them. But I thought I would be okay because I didn't threaten any harm. I threatened legal action, which, I wanted to see my children. And then I was told when they asked if I wanted an attorney, and I said, no, I know what this is about. And that's when the detective told me that I was being accused of CSC in the first degree. And I just was in disbelief. And in all actuality, between the two boys, Ronnie wasn't the fibber. Cody was.
Oh, wow.
So I was really, I just said, I don't believe Ronnie said that because Ronnie doesn't lie. And I never did that.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Lorinda Swain today, who's in the studio with us. We'll take a break and come right back on WBCK. Richard Piet Show on WBCK. We're talking with Lorinda Swain today, whose case has been well publicized. In fact, recently we talked with Dave Moran of the Michigan Innocence Clinic, a unit of the University of Michigan Law School, which is largely responsible for Lorinda being a free woman today. Dave told us that it was a reporter that brought your case to their attention. The Innocence Clinic is in the practice of identifying and investigating wrongful convictions. And they were really the ones that came to your case and investigated it, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
They spent years looking into this. And, you can look back on our blog pages and listen to what he had to say. But he talked about there being a pretty significant percentage of wrongful convictions in the U.S. And so if you're thinking that Lorinda's case is unique, it really isn't in a lot of cases. And we'll talk more about that coming up. You talked about this being unbelievable, that it was almost a dream, but yet this case was moving along and suddenly you were in jail. And a lot of us would have a terrible time trying to anticipate what that would be like. What was jail like for someone like you who had very limited experience with that sort of thing?
I mean, there's really no words to describe how terrible it was. There were several days I thought about suicide, thought about different ways to commit suicide.
Mm-hmm.
I smoked. I smoked more than I think I normally did, and I already normally smoked a lot.
Right.
I used to. I don't know. In all actuality, about 7 years into my stay in prison, I realized that probably if I didn't get justice, my parents were going to die,
Mm-hmm.
and I was going to be 62 years old before I was eligible to leave there.
And might not leave right away.
And when you're accused of my kind of crime, you have to take a group, and you have to go in like once a week, or I'm not exactly sure how often, but it's like a 6-month period at least, and you have to admit guilt in order to be able to leave prison when you're accused of CSC. And about 6 or 7 years into it, I can remember distinctly thinking, if I'm still here in 2021, a year before my earliest release date, and my parents have died, and I've done 24 years or 23 years, I really had, this is terrible to admit, but this is the kind of things that went through my mind. And you can't control your thoughts. You can only control your actions. And I can remember thinking at the time, I will take that group and I'll go in there and I'll get an A+. I'll tell them whatever they want to hear just so I can get out.
Mm-hmm.
But in all honesty, while I was thinking that, I was also thinking, and when I get out, it is not going to be nice. I really had such anger and hatred and bitterness at the time that, I mean, it literally gave me criminal thoughts. I wasn't planning to carry them out. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But, and to carry that kind of hatred and anger and bitterness around for as long as I did, I don't even know how I did it.
Well, and that's part of why we're talking today, I suppose, is because you're a survivor. I mean, you persevered through all of this, and I think a lot of us putting ourselves in that position, trying to think of what that would be like, would have similar thoughts. I mean, what do I have to do to stop this? And the notion of waiting as long as you could have waited would be tremendous. What was a day like typically? Did you have assignments you had to do? Did you have certain activities you had to participate in as an inmate?
I worked in food service the entire 8 years. I was a back dock lead for 4.5 years, and I was a dish room lead for 4.5 years. And I had the most remarkable food service supervisor. Her name was Sheila Osborne. I'm actually going to see if someone can possibly maybe go on a computer and try to find her, because I don't think she works for MDOC anymore. I think they have the food brought in. Plus, my case is over, so she would be eligible to meet me if she wanted to. She encouraged me so much. She originally asked me, if there was light at the end of the tunnel for me, and I had snot coming out my nose, and I told her everything. I mean, every bad thing I ever did and what I was accused of, and she just was a godsend, in all honesty. She
a support system.
She had a lot of faith. We kind of kidded. She would say the F word occasionally. She would say it was us prisoners' fault. But she had so much faith, and she would tell me, Swain, it's okay if your faith falters on certain days, because on the days that your faith falters, I'm going to have the faith for you and me both. Our God's big. He's not going to let you rot in here, and I'm going to watch you walk out of here. And, for any kind of, like when I would write U of M or Bill Proctor did my story. Yep. She would always let me leave work and work on paperwork that I needed to send in or whatever. She told me that she had one daughter, and her whole life, her family, the first thing when they see her, they'd want to know about her daughter. She said, they still ask about my daughter, but she said, they ask about her second now, Swain. She said, and sometimes they even tell me the new stuff that she said her family watched on the computer, and
they were following the story.
Yes, because she was so convinced of my innocence, and I think it was sad for her to watch me.
Lorinda Swain is here talking to us on WBCK. We'll take a break and come right back. Richard Piet Show, WBCK. We're talking with Lorinda Swain today in studio, and in fact, our interview will continue next week as well. So. You had a support system, someone with whom you'd bonded when you were in prison, and that person gave you some encouragement and motivation.
Yes,
yeah,
very definitely.
If she hadn't been there, this would have been more difficult to keep focused, I would imagine.
Yeah. There were a couple of other people, too, at prison.
Really?
There was the woman who did the breast exams from Carmenos. I cried and told her my story. And every year I would kite to get that mammogram so I could see her. She'd pray with me, and, she and then eventually I was going to be on Bill Proctor, Channel 7 News.
Bill Proctor was a reporter on television in Detroit for a long time.
Yes. I was going to bed one night, and he aired a news segment, and it told about a man who he believed was innocent, and he aired his story. So I couldn't get from the bed to the desk fast enough, and I wrote and told him that, I'd watched the news episode that day, and if the guy is innocent, that I hoped he got justice, but that the real reason for my letter was to find out what it took for that man to get him to interview and investigate and air his story, that guy's victim was dead, supposed victim was dead. Mine was very much alive, had passed a polygraph, and, would be willing to take another polygraph. And within 2 to 3 weeks, I was on the TV in my cell, and all the cops and my bunkies and people I was in prison with got to see firsthand my son tell that I'm innocent, that he had lied, and Bill Proctor tell that my son had passed a polygraph. It meant a lot to me, and I was so encouraged about it. But after it was over, I was devastated.
Why?
Because I thought, it doesn't matter that Miss Osborne and the prisoners and everybody knows I'm innocent. As long as the prosecutor and the judge don't care, I'm never going to get out of here. Doesn't matter if everybody in the world knows I didn't do it. What matters is what that prosecutor and judge say. And up at that point, there was no, Judge Sinton didn't have the blinders off yet. And the prosecutor, I believe, knew I was innocent and they had made a mistake, but wasn't willing to step up to the plate and admit.
So you didn't think that report could help turn the tide?
No.
Why not?
I don't know. Like I said, it just really devastated me after seeing it. I was so encouraged prior to it airing, and I can remember my supervisor let me even stay back from work and watch the promos, and it would tell Channel 7 fights for a mom trapped behind bars. Why is she still there? She's innocent. We expose the facts, and I think there was 37 of them, of the promos that I saw myself. So.
Well, you obviously saw them more than once. You recite that very well.
Yeah. So
it did, though, have an effect on the case, do you think, eventually?
Well, I think when U of M started their innocence clinic in 2008, I came back from work, and my cop in my unit told me that I had to go to the other side of the unit, that the officer over there needed to speak to me. So sometimes I delivered trays for sick people, so I thought, well, maybe I had forgotten a tray. So I got over to the other side, and I said to Miss Klein, I said, did I forget a tray, Miss Klein? She said, no, Swain. She said, I got something for you. And she had the article out of the paper in regards to the new non-DNA innocence clinic from the University of Michigan. I had spoken to her about my case, too. So I went back over, and my parents had been to visit me the day before, and my mom was going on a trip on a plane. And every time they visited, I worried that they weren't, going to get in an accident coming or going home. So I stopped to use the phone, and when I called my father, he had received a letter the same day from a person that was in prison that heard about that University of Michigan Innocence Clinic non-DNA. And he read the letter to me and told me about it. So within 5 minutes, I heard from my father on a letter from the phone and the other cop about this new innocence clinic.
Seemed like a sign.
So I couldn't get to the desk fast enough.
Again.
And I wrote a letter, and I, called my parents and told them, put Brad Edwards' Wood 8 news story from 2006 and put Bill Proctor's news tape in and this letter and send it on to University of Michigan. So my mom got home from that vacation, and I met my nephew's aunt while I was in there. She was a secretary for a law firm. And Chucky and I were so close. He was my first oldest nephew, and he knew I was innocent, and he had, told his aunt about me. Well, she was so interested in it, she started writing me, and eventually she came to visit me. So she knew about the U of M thing and had written them and never even told us about it. And she got a letter back from them saying, this is exactly what we're looking for, but we cannot help Lorinda Swain unless she writes us herself. So she called my mom to tell my mom about this. My mom said, you're not going to believe this, Sue. I just went to the mailbox 5 minutes ago, and I just got a letter to University of Michigan Innocence Clinic from Lorinda, and, I've just mailed it. So within a couple weeks, I heard back from University of Michigan Innocence Clinic, and they had, I had to fill out a lot more paperwork, but I met them within, probably 3 weeks or so of writing them.
The momentum was moving.
Yes.
Lorinda Swain is with us. We have spoken with, and you may remember if you listen regularly, to Dave Moran, who is the coordinator and administrator of the Innocence Clinic at University of Michigan. You can hear that interview if you click through on the blog on WBCKFM.com. And coming up on Monday, Lorinda will tell us what she was thinking about this whole Supreme Court situation. And if it had not gone her way, she's very clear about what would have happened next. And we'll hear her talk about that on Monday on the program.